No course about hacking and exploitation and Metasploit is complete without the mention of Armitage. Armitage is a tool that accompanies Metasploit, and it's kind of a front end to Metasploit. It's a graphical interface that uses Metasploit console in the back end, and it helps you automate a lot of things and does a lot of things on your behalf from a nice graphical interface. It does have a big fan base. Personally, I'm not a very big fan because I don't see it as a very smart tool. It does, however, make things a lot easier if you are on a straightforward ethical hacking engagement or a penetration testing engagement. In other words, if you run your Nmap scan, Nessus scan, and you see some vulnerabilities that are glaringly obvious and you know for a fact are 100% exploitable, then you can use Armitage to automate a few things and do things a little bit faster. On the other hand, I would never use it in a situation where I'm not exactly sure what I'm about to do. Because as with anything graphical, there's a very good chance that things are happening in the background without you knowing exactly what's going on. If you don't set up things yourself, you don't configure things yourself, you might end up doing more damage than good. So you might end up firing the wrong exploit, crashing a system, rebooting a system, and these are things that you would never ever want to do in a professional ethical hacking engagement. So to re-emphasize, if you are in a lab environment or in a forgiving environment or in an environment that you are very familiar with and you're 100% sure of what you're doing, by all means go ahead and use Armitage. But if you're not 100% sure of what you're doing, please don't rely on it. I'm going to be showing you in this video a few examples of how we can successfully use it and how we can unsuccessfully use it, so you can see both sides of the coin. Now, to fire up Armitage, I can do it from my favorites bar in Kali. All I have to do is click on the icon and then click on connect. If Metasploit server is not running, it'll ask me if I want to run it. I'll say yes, and it'll try to connect to the server. Now what's going to happen is it's going to throw an error that says connection is refused and it cannot connect. Be a little bit patient, this error will resolve itself and the connection will eventually succeed. So just give it a few seconds, and then when the connection succeeds, it's going to fire up the graphical interface of Armitage. Now if you look at the left hand side here, these are all the modules that exist in Metasploit, and the course that is dedicated to Metasploit will go into a lot of details in each and every one of these modules. But to give you a very quick overview for now, the auxiliary modules are all the modules that do not have exploits in them. For example, you can do a port scan using Metasploit. You can do password attacks using Metasploit. You can do a whole bunch of things that are not exactly exploitation. And these are the modules that we call the auxiliary modules. The exploit modules, these are self-explanatory. So these are all the exploits that we use to break into the system, whether we end up breaking in as root or non-root. I'll jump over the payload because we'll get back to that in a second. The post module are the things that we can run post-exploitation or after we manage to exploit the target. So, for example, if we manage to break in as non-root, we can run certain modules that will allow us, or that could give us the chance to escalate privileges and become root or administrator on Windows. We can also run other tools that will allow us to steal passwords from memory, steal passwords from browsers, install keyloggers, so on and so forth. The payload, which is the third module that I just jumped over, these are things that happen when we run the exploit. And I'm going to be going into details later on through this course. But for now, it's suffice to think of it as, what do I want to happen on the system when I successfully exploit it? So do I want to get root access? Do I want to add a user? Do I want to install a program? Etc. So that was a quick overview. Like I said, in the Metasploit course, we're going to be taking a deep dive into all of these modules and how to configure each and every one of them. Now, let us set up Armitage to attack a few targets. I've set up a mini lab for you guys because I wanted to show you the beauty of Armitage. I know I might have come across that I'm not in favor of using it, but that's not really true. I mean, it does make things a lot easier if you use it in the right way. And one of the things that it makes it a lot easier to do is if you're attacking a number of targets at the same time, Armitage can really shine in this context. So I've set up a lab of 3 different hosts so I can show you how this happens. And as always, I'm going to start with the port scanning. And like you can see here, I can actually use Nmap from within Metasploit and Armitage to do the scan. So I'm going to go to Nmap scan and I'll choose the quick scan with OS detection. I'll put the range. I'll click OK and I will let Nmap run its scan. And you can see here the Nmap command with all the options that are running. And this is what I was talking about. So on the graphical interface, it looks to us that we just did an Nmap scan. However, there's quite a few options here that have been configured without our knowledge should this output have not been visible to us. And this is an occurrence that happens unfortunately with quite a few tools. Luckily for us in Armitage and in this particular case, we can actually see what's happening. But imagine if that particular line wasn't visible, we would have ended up running an Nmap scan without us really knowing exactly what options are being used. I will let the scan finish and we can scroll up here to see the results. So you can see here that VSFTPD version 2.3.4 is running on the target, there's OpenSSH and so on and so forth. These are all things that we've seen before in the course. Of course, you would have noticed already that on the upper window, I can see 3 different IP addresses, 2 with a small penguin figure on them indicating that these are Linux servers, and 1 with a black screen. That means that Armitage, or Nmap to be exact, was not able to specify what kind of operating system is running on this target. Now, let me show you the kind of automation that I was telling you about and how it can be both very quick and useful, and at the same time it can be very dangerous. I'm going to go to the attacks tab and I'm going to say find attacks. So Armitage now is going to go and query all the exploits in Metasploit and will return back to me a list of all the exploits that affect any of the services that appeared in my Nmap scan. So that was a mouthful. Let me show you what I'm talking about, what I mean by that. I'll right click on one of the targets. I'll go to the attack menu and look at this. For example, the FTP menu shows me a number of exploits that I can use. Now, if you pay close attention, you'll see that yes, I do have a number of FTP exploits, but these are different versions of FTP. I have Pro FTP, I have Pure FTP, I have VS FTP, and I have Woo FTP. Why is Armitage giving me all these options, and are these all going to work? Of course not. The reason Armitage is giving me these options because it looked at the Nmap scan, it found out that there's an FTP service running. It also identified the target to be a Linux box. So what it did is that it went to the Metasploit exploit database and it looked for all the FTP exploits that affect that particular version of Linux. And then it presented them back to me in a menu. But of course, that does not mean that all these exploits are going to work, because obviously you cannot have a pure FTP service running, which is at the same time a Pro FTPD service. So I'm going to go ahead and use the check exploits option. And this option will run the Metasploit console in such a way that it will check if the target is vulnerable to any of these exploits without actually exploiting them. I'll click on check exploits and now you'll see how the automation happens. So Metasploit is running, it's fetching all these exploits one by one and it's doing a quick check on them and it'll return back the results saying either the target is exploitable or not exploitable, or the third option, which is the module does not support check, meaning that this particular exploit module does not have a check option. Some modules, yes, you can check if the target is exploitable. Some modules will tell you it is or it's not. And some modules, there is no check option. But this is still not all bad because I have eliminated a number of vulnerabilities that I know are not exploitable on the target. Let me go back to the Nmap scan. And if I scroll up back to the FTP service, you'll notice that this is the VSFTPD and particularly it's version 2.3.4. So let me see what was the result for this check. I'll go back to the check exploits tab and it's the only module that does not support check. So I'm left with the only option of running the exploit in the hope that it's going to work. So again, I'll right click on the target, go to attack, FTP, and this time instead of check exploits, I'm going to select the VSFTP 2.3.4 backdoor. I'll expand this a bit. And this is exactly what you would have gotten in the MSF console, in the console-based Metasploit. It has the description of the exploit and it has the options that you need to configure. In the MSF console, we do that manually. So we do set our host, set our port, and so on. Here we can do it graphically, so I can just double click on the value and I can change it. I don't have to change it here because I know it's on port 21. Of course, if you want to, you can also change the advanced options, but I'm not going to go through these at the moment. We'll be leaving these for the Metasploit Mastery course. And I'll click launch. And I get an output that says, a shell is found and a command shell session 1 is open. And it appears that nothing has happened, but if I go back to my target, look how the icon has changed. The frame is all red and I have these lightnings surrounding the target, meaning that I managed to compromise this target. So this gives me an indication, a visual indication of what targets have been compromised. Okay, great, but where is my shell? Notice here the exploit -J. When we usually run an exploit on MSF console, what we've seen so far is we do one of two things, either type exploit or type run. Both will do the same thing, both will run the exploit. And then after the exploit runs successfully, we get presented by a shell. But here the difference is that Armitage has done exploit -J, meaning run the exploit as a background job. We've already seen how to do background jobs in Linux, and this is very similar. Metasploit also have the option of running the exploit as a background job because this releases back the Metasploit console so we can keep running other commands should we wish to. So now if I type jobs, we'll see that I have a job ID of 0 and it's an exploit running with certain payload parameters and so on. Okay, but still, where is my session? To see what sessions I have, all I need to do is type sessions and hit enter. And here it is. This is the information of my session. Its ID is 1. It's a Unix command shell open on my target. To interact with this session, I do sessions -I for interact and the ID of the session, which in this case is session number 1. Now if I right click on the target, you'll see I have a new option in the menu called shell 1. And if I go to shell 1, I have an option to interact with this shell. Notice that I also have the option to upload. So I'm able to upload things graphically here as well to the target system. I'll click on interact and you'll see that a new tab has opened called shell 1 and now I have shell on my target. If I type ifconfig, I'll see the network information of my target getting returned. If I type who am I, successfully, I should get an output, but it seems that I cannot spell today. Nonetheless, notice that if I type clear, I get some kind of gibberish appearing on my screen. Because this is what we call a non-interactive shell. Later on through this course, we're going to be taking a deep dive into non-interactive shells and how we can convert them into interactive shells. So let me close this shell. You'll see that although I did close the shell, I still have the visual of the compromised host, meaning that it is still compromised, and should I wish to, I can go back and reopen the shell. So if I want to disconnect the shell, I'll go back to the menu, I'll go to shell 1 and I'll click on disconnect. And now my shell is disconnected and look at the visual, it's changed again, meaning I have lost my quote-unquote compromise. I have lost my root access, I have lost my shell.